Hey there, I'm Joel James from 8 Weeks Out, and I'm here with
Coach Luca Holstevar from Vigor Fitness and Performance.
And in this video, what I want to do is work with Luca to dive into the three major components of conditioning. And I want to talk about this because I get asked how to improve conditioning all the time. It's a huge question, obviously, given that's what I do a lot of the time. And the reality is that where most people go wrong is by not understanding the big picture things you have to do. They get caught up in the details, they get caught up in minutia, sets, reps, rest intervals, without understanding that conditioning is the result of three major components.
So this is the principles.
This is the three core things you have to improve if you want to improve your conditioning, okay? So the first one is metabolic systems, okay? So also known as energy systems, of course, this is a big piece of it. And I wrote my first book, Ultimate MMA Conditioning, really focusing on the metabolic systems of conditioning. Now, in that end of things, we have two major energy pathways, right? We're gonna write down, so we have the aerobic system. Everyone knows the aerobic system means you need oxygen, and it is a big part of what drives the endurance, or the ability to produce power for longer periods of time. And then we have the anaerobic side, okay? And you've got two anaerobic branches, but we'll just talk about the anaerobic versus the aerobic. So the first thing to understand here is these need to be developed for everybody, but the question is, how much of each do we need to develop? Because there's a trade-off. If I go really far this direction, I can produce more force, more power, but I'm gonna lose my ability to produce it for very long. And vice versa, or by comparison, if I go really into the deep in the aerobic side of things and I develop none of the anaerobic side, I'm gonna have great endurance with no power output.
So this will be a great example. Actually, one of our coaches is doing a 100-mile run, right?
Yeah, they need lots of that.
a lot of aerobic,
lot
right?
Of that, yep.
I don't like doing those long runs. I sprint a lot. Right here, right?
Yep.
And how would one affect the other one, right? Like, again, if Tyler is doing a lot of this, it's gonna tap into that,
you basically look at it this way. You can't develop both of these to their limits, and you have to make choices. Number one, because the body's not designed for that, and number two, because there's only so many hours in a day to train. If I'm going to develop one of these systems, I want to put my energy towards that system. So in general, what we do when we want to improve conditioning is figure out where is our time going to be the most productive. And that's going to depend on your sport, your fitness level, your goals, how much time you have to train, all those sorts of things. But for the most part, you need an aerobic foundation for most goals out there. It doesn't mean we don't also include the anaerobic side, but the aerobic side is a really big piece of the conditioning puzzle. All right, number two ties into this, and that is movement capacity, okay? And this is an area where a lot of people miss the boat, okay? They focus so much on the energy systems that they've missed the fact that movement is ultimately what drives the need for energy. So if you are really inefficient in your movement, you have bad technique, you just don't have good mobility, you are more likely to gas out because you are burning energy that you don't need to be.
And so let's take a couple of examples here because I think it's as good. One, so let's say somebody hasn't exercised for a while and they come in and they're stiff. You know, their hips are stiff,
Yep.
their upper back is stiff.
Can't move.
They can't move well.
Yep.
But then we have them doing lunges with rotation, squats, things of that nature. Like because of the lack of movement capacity, how is that going to affect metabolic systems?
Exactly. So again, the more energy it takes you to do something, the higher that overall energy cost may be, the more likely you are to tap into the anaerobic side, the more likely you are to recover slower and gas out faster. So just think about this from a sensible standpoint. The more efficient we are, the longer we can do something without having to slow down. So we want to look at this from two standpoints. Number one, we can just right here, you just need to have good general movement, okay? So you need to have the joint mobility and stability and strength through range of motion. You need to have good technique. You need to have all those things. But here's where people miss out, okay? Because we see people doing a lot of these types of movements as the warm-up, right? How much time do people spend doing mobility type warm-ups? A lot, right?
A lot. I mean, more than ever now.
Yeah, exactly, and they focus on technique, and that's great. But here's where people break down. As soon as they start working on energy systems, their technique goes out the window. And part of that is because coaches have been taught, intensity, push people, intensity, and that's what the goal is. But if you are developing really bad movement and mechanics as you are building these, you are learning how to move inefficiently at high levels of fatigue.
And this is a great point. So what you're saying too, if we're, when you're exercising, and let's take a high intensity class that has multiple exercises, kettlebell clean and presses and throws, and at the beginning, round one, everybody's looking pretty good. This is fine. We go to round 6, and it starts getting bad, right?
Yep.
It progressively gets worse, but the exercise and the workout is hard. But now we're really like breaking down that movement
We're breaking
capacity.
this down. We're essentially, we're teaching the body how to move very inefficiently under fatigue circumstances, which is what conditioning largely ends up being. So we just can't separate these, all right? If our goal is to improve either one of these, it can't come at the expense of good movement capacity. And the body learns to move differently at rest or low intensities versus high intensities versus when you are gassing yourself out and producing high levels of force and power. So don't ever let's just put this, never sacrifice movement for energy systems or something along those lines, right? Don't let your training be so driven by your heart rate that you throw your technique completely out the window. And you see this happen all the time. Like, I specialize in combat sports. What do you see when fighters start to get tired? They start just winging it. They start throwing for the fences because that's what they've developed as a habit as part of their training. Because as soon as they start to get tired, what do the coaches do? Push harder,
push,
go faster. Now again, I'm not saying there's not a place for that, but if you're going to push someone harder in terms of their energy systems, you can't let them sacrifice their movement quality and their movement capacity in the process.
That's actually an incredibly critical point, because this is a question for you. If you're coaching, if you're exercising, and even think about the last month or the last weeks or the last training sessions, when you got really tired, can you say, if we said, hey, 0 to 10, movement quality, when you were really tired, where was it? Was it a 4, a 3, a 5? And be really honest, because what we're saying is this should be on the high side no matter how tired you get. And that's going to make you a better athlete, less prone to injury. And again, it's going to improve your conditioning, right? Because these two cannot be separated.
Yep. It's the same thing, like let's say you're lifting, right? The heavier the weight gets, you have to maintain good technique. Why? Because your technique is really sloppy. As the weight goes higher and higher, you're more likely to injure yourself and you're not going to develop the same. So it's the same thing with conditioning. If we're working energy systems, the more tired we get, the more we have to focus on our technique, not the less. So you've got to tie this together. And that actually ties me into 3, which may be right here so we can see it. 3 is mental performance, okay? The mental side of the game is a huge piece of conditioning. Now, we can look at this in different ways. Most people would say the mental side of conditioning is just the mental toughness, right? Just learn how to go as hard as you possibly can, run yourself into the ground. And while that part of it is important, what I'm actually talking about is the ability to control your energy. So because a huge piece of this, like we talked about, if I'm an athlete and I'm in a situation where I'm fatiguing, I need to know how to control my energy expenditure. I call it dynamic energy control. And it's an important quality because, again, our body can only produce a certain amount of energy, and how we choose to use it is ultimately going to be a huge piece about whether or not our conditioning is successful or not. So the biggest thing here is awareness. Okay, awareness is probably the first place to start. And this is where I think a heart rate monitor becomes incredibly valuable, because a heart rate monitor is the best biofeedback we can get. And as you start to learn your own body and your own energy limits, you will find what heart rates are sustainable and what heart rates are going to lead to fatigue. And then you have to develop the ability to control that, to learn to push at different edges, be aware of how much more room you have to go, how much more reserve, and you become much more effective at using your body's true potential versus just going out there, going as hard as you possibly can, not being smart about your game plan, your energy, your tactics, and then just completely gassing yourself out.
And this, when we were actually going through a lot of the methods, the different conditioning methods, what I loved, I had a Morpheus on, we had a screen, and I could see the different levels on the screen. And Joe would say, hey, I want you to go to the top of the green, or I want you to go to your threshold. But the thing is, because now I'm aware of where I am, I actually know what that is, right? Because it's much more difficult to do. If somebody says, hey, listen, I want you to stay in the blue zone, where we're working aerobic capacity. And a lot of people will overdo that, right?
Absolutely.
Or they'll underdo if I say, hey, let's get to the red zone, right? Get to that peak level of max effort. And you also won't know what that truly is. And so that's where I feel like this comes into play, and being able to actually understand that and go up and down, because a lot of times you only know kind of one way, right? And so what are some, on a mental performance side, I loved this because you brought up and said, hey, mental performance just ends up being just push more.
Yeah, and
right?
what does that do? That takes you right into these bad technique habits, which is going to compromise your energy system. So all of these can be connected, right? These are the dots that are connected in your conditioning. And again, because people are focused on only one, which is usually this one, and they miss out on the other ends of it, their conditioning ultimately suffers.
And so this is, I mean, this is such a great point, because how can you, the question of how can you improve your conditioning? Well, we could go into here and say, well, do more anaerobic, or you're not doing enough aerobic capacity work. But just with these 2 points, you can improve it by improving your movement capacity when you're tired, and by improving your awareness of where you should be on kind of like the level of intensity. And that's going to improve your mental performance. And now your conditioning goes up, even though you didn't just do the same old things that everybody is doing.
Exactly. And I see a lot of times, again, people develop these to the levels that they're, sufficient for what they're trying to do, but then they completely break down here and their conditioning suffers. And ultimately, the way I would define conditioning is your ability to use your fitness effectively. So in our case, perform better for a sport, or just live a longer, healthier life. If you don't have all 3 of these dialed in, then these become a lot less valuable, because you're not using them up to the potential if you were moving effectively and efficiently, and your had the ability to control that stress response, that adrenaline rush. You need to learn how to control all that, not just, again, for a sports performance, but because life is stressful. And a lot of what this is doing is just teaching you how to deal with stress, whether it's training or life stress. You can learn how to control yourself and your energy expenditure by building this quality. So they all tie together.
And this is, I love this, because it's something that we use here at Vigor in, from your teachings, which is how to be able to manage stress with cardio, right?
Exactly.
Which is like when people will come in, we have rebound days, which is, you have rebound workouts, which is actually an outline that Joel kind of put into the conditioning system. And we use that, and people will come in and move better. We'll put all of these things into place and actually leave more recover faster for the next training session. So it's a perfect example of how you can use these inside of your training to get the most out of it and actually get your clients the best results as well.
Yeah, exactly. So again, whether you're training yourself or you're training everybody or other people, these are the things you have to consider when it comes to your conditioning. So if you want to improve your conditioning, evaluate all 3 of these areas, see where it is that you can improve, and then put your energy there. Really focus on improving an area that needs improvement, and you will see the results. And it's really just a matter of figuring out, again, where to spend your time and energy. So if you're a coach, this is a great place to start with your clients, understanding what's going to help them get better. If you're training yourself, it's the same process. And then if you want a complete done for your system, make sure you check out Metamorphosis. It's my new 8-week conditioning program. So we build all 3 of these components. There's educational pieces around that. If you're a coach or trainer, make sure you check out my Bioforce conditioning certification. You'll learn how to write conditioning programs. And this I call this the M3 model, 3 M's, right? So you learn how to dive into each one of these areas and build out the right energy systems, go through the right assessment, how to evaluate movement capacity under different loads and fatigues, how to train that mental performance side of things. But all these pieces, again, are how you improve your conditioning. And if you're not focusing all of them together, you're not able to build the right pieces, and you're limited by one of them, you're ultimately never going to have the conditioning that you're capable of. So hope this helps, and we'll see you again next time.